Today we're reading John chapter 13 together. Now, this chapter details the beginning events of the night before Jesus was crucified. We talk about how there was the night that Jesus was betrayed, and that was this night. Now, specifically today, we're going to talk about and read through the meal that Jesus shared with his disciples on that night. And in verse 1, we read this. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. Now, up to this point in the Gospel of John, you might have remembered that Jesus has said before that his time had not yet come. And specifically, he says it 5 times. He now says that his time has come. The time has come for all the things that he has said to come to fruition. The time has come for him to leave this earth and to return to his Father. Now, one more thing to note about this first verse. John tells us that Jesus loved his disciples completely and fully. That's what he means by saying he loved his disciples to the very end. After the meal they shared together, Jesus demonstrated his love with this incredible act of humility with his disciples, an act of humility that showed his incredible love for his disciples. We read this in verse 3. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Now, before we dive into this specific act of Jesus washing his disciples' feet, I think it's really important to note that first verse that we just read, and it's John calling attention to the fact that Jesus knew who he was. Jesus knew that God had given him authority. Jesus knew his identity as God's Son, and yet he still chooses to demonstrate this act of service, this act of humility. And I think sometimes in our 21st century ways of thinking, we can miss the gravity, we can miss the weight of what Jesus did for his disciples on this night. The act of washing feet was reserved for servants. Guests of houses would come in after a long day of walking on dirty ground that wasn't just covered in dirt. I will leave it at that. And they had sandals on, and so the feet were often the dirtiest part of the person. And so the servants would wash the feet, and it was not an attractive job, to say the least. Teachers would never have asked their disciples to wash their feet, nor would have teachers washed their disciples' feet. And so Jesus was being incredibly countercultural at the time to kneel down and to wash his own disciples' feet as who he was. So he does it to show his love for his disciples and to illustrate how to love others. He gives them further instructions about how to follow in this example, starting in verse 12. Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth. Slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. Jesus then goes on to predict that one of his own would betray him. Jesus knows who it's going to be. Judas was sitting right next to Jesus during this meal. Jesus still washed Judas's feet. Jesus still shared a meal with Judas, knowing that he was going to be the one that was going to betray him, that would ultimately give him over to the ones who were going to crucify him. Now, once Judas leaves, Jesus tells the disciples what is going to happen next. He says, "The time has come for the Son of Man to enter into his glory, and God will be glorified because of him. And since God receives glory because of the Son, he will give his own glory to the Son, and he will do so at once. Dear children, I will be with you only a little longer. And as I told the Jewish leaders, you will search for me, but you can't come where I am going. So now I am giving you a new commandment. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples." Jesus gives them this picture of how to live. It's a picture that is perfectly exemplified in the way that Jesus himself lived while he was on earth. His life was defined by perfect love. The greatest example of which they had not seen yet was giving his life for the sake of others. He laid down his own life out of love for his children. He says, live in this way. Love one another to the end. Love one another in a way that points them to me so that others can come to know me. You and I have this same instruction from Jesus. We, as followers of Jesus, are called to a life that is defined by love. Let his love seep out from every single ounce of your being and everything you say, do, and think, so that others can come to know him. So maybe Jesus isn't calling us to physically wash another person's feet today. Maybe he is, I don't know. But I do believe that he's calling each of us to acts of love that are going to point people back to him. How can you show the kind of love that Jesus showed his disciples by washing their feet? What is one thing that you can do today? You never know how God could use one simple act of love and obedience to work in the life of another person. So let that be our challenge today.
If these devotional videos are helpful to you, subscribe to our channel and click the notification button so you know when we post a new video. And of course, please share them with others.